Identity politics is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as, quote, a tendency for people of a particular religion, race, social background, etc., to form exclusive political alliances, moving away from traditional, broad-based party politics. First and foremost, does that definition make sense to you?
Yep. That sounds congruent with what I perceived identity politics to be.
So with that said, do you agree that this is a good idea?
Identity politics at its core is something I disagree with, and it to me it makes no sense from an argumentative perspective, because when you dilute the entire side of an argument to one pivotal point, I think that removes a lot of the context of the purpose behind that argument. And in the case of things like race, right? Oh, I'm black, so therefore this movement matters to me, or it has to do with black people, so therefore it's helpful to me, right? I think it's very dangerous. So, as a basic answer, it's a horrible idea. I hate it.
Well, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit more on that, but let me give a basic background on what I think as well, just to get the framework set. I also don't like it. I don't think it's valuable, partly because of one-party politics, which I don't appreciate. The idea that, and we've touched on this in the past, that if I am, let's say, pro-gun, I support the NRA, then you can now, with a high confidence, predict every other political decision about me. You know, whether or not I'm Christian, whether or not I'm white, whether or not I live somewhere in the South or Midwest, whether or not I'm for or against abortions. You can kind of figure out a person based on one political identity, as it were. And I don't appreciate that. With that said, I want to challenge you and even play devil's advocate for myself, because as someone who acknowledges the history of our country or even the world, I acknowledge that there are so many problems in society, more in the past than now, at least in terms of racial or gender barriers, but there are still some. And it strikes me as, on the surface, a well-intentioned attempt to bring together marginalized groups, for example. Do you not see that as a valid argument as to why we should, in fact, have minority groups that are identified together to, in some sense, move together as one, in the same light as the Black Lives Matter movement, or even back through Martin Luther King Jr.'s time? Do you not see a relevance here to these lines of thinking?
So in the case of identity politics helping marginalized groups, I think if that were the case today, I wouldn't have a problem with them. But where I struggle to understand all of this is where precisely marginalized groups are having issues in this country. And it's kind of tough, because you can say one thing or the specific problem affects this specific race of people, so it should be their problem. I don't have any concrete examples, but just looking at it generally, I have issues with how it's carried out in the modern political stage, in how people are using it. I don't think it's justified today, because a lot of the areas of contention where people think that there are problems, either this is my own ignorance or perhaps a failure on these groups to present their case. I don't see where the actual issue is a majority of the time. A lot of the time, these political problems to me seem actually more like cultural problems. And it seems a lot more to me like people have this mistrust in each other. And what identity politics ends up doing is isolating groups of people based on skin rather than eliminating this difference and bringing forth some sort of common goal that everyone could have, right? The whole idea of saying you're black, so this should matter to you. I think that's a problem because maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a lot of legislation in many areas of this country that are inherently racist. Now, there might be a couple, but I haven't heard that brought forth as an argument from, and this is predominantly from the left. I haven't heard that brought up in many arguments. I haven't heard the specifics like, oh, this exact article and this exact piece of legislation in this county, we need to get rid of it. They're just preaching a very high level argument of racism's bad or we need to get rid of it, and they're calling it systemic. And I think that's confusing. But identity politics I think plays into that a lot in categorizing these people, and it does make their argument or their fighting power greater. They now have a group to talk to present their case with.
Admittedly, the phraseology seems to be poorly executed. This idea that something is systemic, which very well may be true, is not actually talking about de jure legislation. Because to your point, most legislation today, most legal practice is relatively egalitarian. Not absolutely, and gerrymandering is an example people like to bring up. But generally speaking, especially on the federal level, it's equality of opportunity for everyone. But what a lot of people try to argue, and to your point, particularly on the left, but across the spectrum in some ways, is that this doesn't paint the full picture. This only conveys what the law says, but who enforces the law? Let's say the county sheriff. Well, if your county sheriff doesn't enforce the law, then you still have de facto racism. There is a segregation of, we all know, Jim Crow's separate but equal. Well, that is legally, at least on the surface, I don't know the nitty-gritty of the law, totally egalitarian. It's separate, but it's totally equal, no problem. And we saw how damaging that was, because if your enforceability is not held accountable, then it's not really equal, regardless of the law. But then on the flip side, to something I think you alluded to, there is an interesting irony to the fact that we now have so much sectarianism in the name of inclusivity that everyone is becoming part of an in-group, which is in fact a segregation of people. Not a legal segregation, not a racial segregation, to use that term differently, but it's a division of people. Maybe that's a less weighted term. The idea that only the black community is allowed to talk about black community problems, right? Even if you're a legal scholar who studies ethics and minority problems, well, if you're white, then you're no longer living this shared experience, which is by definition divisive and not unifying. So there is an interesting problem to be solved here where we cannot fail to recognize potential failures in accountability and enforceability and legal action in practice. But at the same time, if we put everyone into their own group and then imply they're separate but equal, then we are unfortunately using the exact same dangerous line of thinking, albeit with a better intent, which is still, I think, dangerous.
I like what you did there. You kind of took my argument and you found a weak spot in it, but you added on top of that. So, I think that's. I think you're, at least from my perspective, you're hitting the same tones that I want to hit, and it's that And it's that I believe that there is truly a lack of common experience, I believe, as you phrased earlier, in America. I think so many people live through their lives and experience different things, which is fantastic, in my humble opinion. And it's not necessarily because they experience different things that leads to different perspectives and different, how do I want to put this, different takes on what justice and equality should look like. I think it's just because the culture of people is just so vastly different across the country. And I haven't experienced even a lot of the East Coast, and the little I did experience was as a tourist, so I never really got into the nitty gritty of how people live there. But, just having lived in California and visited my sister there, I visited her pretty recently, a couple months ago, and it's pretty continual. The whole atmosphere is just different as you go across the country. And so to the point that America lacks this common experience, I think lends itself to some of the cultural problems we're having today. And when you talk about de facto segregation and racial issues, right? I think I actually agree with you there that as much as it might be in law that these things aren't allowed, at the end of the day, it's what actually happens that matters. And in some of these places, you do get people who treat others horribly because of skin color. And so, in my humble opinion, right, the fact that these police officers are treating other people differently based on skin color is more a testament to the lack of social cohesion rather than any problems in the system, right? I think there's just a disconnect there on a human-to-human basis. Like if it's not legal, why would a cop practice such a thing, right? They're supposed to embody all of the laws and enforce them, so why would they go against the grain? At the end of the day, I think it's just because there's a disconnect on a personal level. There's a lack of common, I don't want to say common culture, but common experience that would help them relate more and be more empathetic towards people if they were racist. I haven't talked to a lot of hardcore racists in my life, so I don't know how easy it is to turn a racist into someone who isn't racist. I don't know what that would exactly look like. But I think at the core, it's a community problem that needs to be solved. I'm not saying we should put up community centers instead of police stations, because I think that has been proven to be less effective. But perhaps there can be a better sense of community built between law enforcement and the people. So,
well, policing is an interesting dynamic because in major cities, at least the research that I've been able to find, there is not a huge disparity, at least on the fringes. Let's talk about police killings, right? Police killing rates, when accounting for crime rates, which strikes me as an obvious factor to include, although maybe others may not see that as a good variable to compare on. But if you account for crime rates, then police murder rates are actually not any higher if you're black than if you're white. But at the same time, that doesn't account for altercation rates, which are substantially higher if you're of a minority class. It doesn't account for the relationship between drugs like marijuana and how that affects minorities in the justice system. And there's a lot of data to support the inequity there. And then if you want to take it more specifically, as I somewhat alluded to with the sheriff example, and as you seemingly alluded to as well, there also is likely small towns where you can have a racist police force as well. Now, from what I can tell, that's becoming less and less of an issue, but that doesn't mean it's a non-issue. That doesn't mean it's gone. So the real question is, can dividing ourselves into groups to empower those who need it end up attaining this equality? And then ultimately, will it end up swinging this pendulum the other way? Will we get to a point where every group is now actually equal, not only by law, but by gerrymandering standards, but by access to the workforce and all of these different parameters you could measure on? Then what do you do? Because now you haven't changed people's perception at all. It just takes a really powerful Twitter post or a video like George Floyd's horrendous death. It just takes that to persuade an entire country to protest. But if you get to a point where there really is equality, which you can only hope is the goal here, if the goal is to just stay divided forever to continue promoting your agenda, you're really not helping anyone. So if we get to that point where we no longer need an agenda based on divisiveness, but in the process we've managed to divide the entire society to a point of separate and actually equal, will we ever lose the latter half? Will we just stay separate, but then at some point whoever's in power is just going to willingly or otherwise oppress the rest of us once again? And I say the rest of us loosely. Obviously, I was never oppressed. I'm a white guy. Clearly, I had it made. Everyone would agree with that, especially those promoting identity politics generally. But at some point, whoever's in power might then just restart the cycle, and then politics has a new platform again. It strikes me as self-fulfilling in a very dangerous way that doesn't ever reach an end goal. Do you think I'm being too pessimistic here?
No, I think here's how I think about it, right? This massive divide that's happening is because you identify with a community because of one trait, right? Race, for example. And then a figurehead, it doesn't have to be the community itself. It actually only has to be an influencer, at least what I've observed. It only has to be someone that has enough power to reach everyone's ears and is generally liked by many people in that community. They just got to say one thing about another group in a negative light, and all of a sudden you have enemies. And I think the problem with identity politics as well is that it removes any opportunity for an individual to actually think through a problem. Instead, you're fed what you should believe to be the problem, and by nature of being a part of that culture, you don't have to question it because, well, clearly the leader has the best interest in my mind, or in their mind, because we agree on this one thing, or we're both black, right? And that's not necessarily the case. And so I think it will, even if we get to the point where it's a bunch of separate, groups that all equally practice egalitarianism for their particular constituents, I just feel like across these groups, it's going to be, even ignoring any potential of any leader in those groups alone, being able to manipulate people in the way that they can across groups is also, I think, not healthy. I don't want a future where there's a black community and a white guy walks in and like, oh, what's up? What are you doing here, white guy? Right? I mean, that actually happens to some extent in some areas already, or a black guy walks into a rich white neighborhood and they're like, oh, it's a black guy. Right? And I don't know why I said rich. This has nothing to do with socioeconomic class right now, or economic class by itself, I should say. But I think that's a worse off future, because how the heck are we going to work together and be comfortable with each other when one of the first things you think of is, what is this? Why is he here? Right? He's not part of this. What the heck? I feel like that'd be a very distracting train of subconscious thoughts that pop up from such a culture. So one of the things that I'm actually curious about is why people are so easily, drawn to the idea of identity politics. When I look at it, and this has been my experience in politics, I'm like, I have the mentality that I'd rather think for myself. I don't care what Neil deGrasse Tyson says on whatever political issue, right? If he says something about astrophysics, I'll probably believe him because he's qualified. But if he says something about, racial tension, despite him being black, I mean, that doesn't give me any more reason to listen to him. He's not a professional just by the virtue of having a different skin color, in my humble opinion. So, I don't know if it's because people have these fantasies about particular speakers and movements and how the world should be, or something else, but I just find it hard to resonate with people who use identity politics for explaining their motivations.
I think what happens is once people are convinced this is the best idea, let's say, to answer your question, because it makes you feel like you're part of a community, makes you feel like you're part of a group. What then happens is a assumption that everyone has the same lived experience. Every black person has felt the same racism. Every white person has felt the same opportunity and the same advantages in some sense. Every Christian has experienced the same hand of God in their prayers. There's this general understanding that once you're in a group, you all have the same experience. And that's what the problem is, because we're at a point now where, let's say you went to a BLM rally, and this will sound contentious at first, but I think if I explain it, my point will be made more clear. I was in a class the other day where individuals were discussing how, white individuals, I might add, were discussing how they wanted to speak at a rally, or they saw someone who wanted to speak who was also white, but they weren't allowed to because they didn't have the same lived experience as these other black people, right? And this doesn't have to just be BLM. If it was a white supremacy rally and they didn't let a black person speak, it would be the same idea. One is just obviously more contentious and has more historical backing than the other, of course. But then what happens is everyone gets lumped together. And I wonder if you want to touch on this at all, if not even make your own video on it at some point. I know we've discussed this to some extent, because you are potentially considered an Asian man. Depends how you want to identify yourself. You never seem to really strike me as someone who cares too much about that, but you are at least half Asian. And by general standards in the university system or in society, you could call yourself Asian, no problem. And I wondered, do you see any problem with being lumped with other Asians, or in an opposite perspective, do you like the idea of saying, well, other Asians, and obviously they're contentious right now with that Atlanta shooting, but on the flip side, they also have the highest average salaries in the U.S., and maybe you like that as a motivating factor. How do you feel about that on a personal level while we're discussing individuals? And talk on behalf of all Asians if you want, or talk on behalf of just yourself.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for the first half here, and then I'm going to give how I actually feel. And whether or not that aligns with how I talk in the first half, we'll just have to see. I will probably talk about this more in depth on probably something that I'll upload on my personal channel. But I can see why people love the idea of us having a sense of community, because one of the most frustrating things might be trying to talk to someone and they don't feel the same way you do about, certain things in life, and their perspectives might be different in a way that clashes with perspectives you have. For me, right, my family is, I have an Asian mom and I have a white dad, right? And my dad, I'm not going to get into too many details because it's their personal lives, but, he had some family issues growing up, and, his dad, my grandfather, he taught him certain things. This is kind of vague. I want to save the names and all the details just for sake of anonymity. But at the end of the day, he started valuing families, right? And the same thing can be said about my mom. And for my mom, right, and this is kind of a blanket statement, but I think Asian cultures generally favor the family unit more. And so, obviously, my mom She has some crazy stories from her childhood. I'm not going to get into them, but it's definitely a different place over there in the Philippines. When she came to America, and you know, she started a family with my dad. It seems like they worked so hard to keep this family unit together, right? And I feel like that was a mixture of not only my mom's culture, but my dad's experiences with his family, and probably not wanting what he experienced. He wanted something better than that. And so, if I talk to people, I'm like, oh yeah, parents are awesome, They do so much for you. They work hard. They teach you these things you need to learn, and then they let you figure life out yourself. If I talk to someone like, what? That's horrible. Why would they ever do that? I would feel awful. I'd be like, oh, what the heck? And so through building a community and a common sense of, or a common perspective about morals in the world around us, I think that in human psychology that makes an answer easier to find, right? You're like, well, clearly the answer is this because everyone thinks this way. However, I don't feel that way at all. I don't feel bad if I talk to someone and I'm like, yeah, my parents are awesome. They're like, oh, I think your parents did that absolutely horribly. I'd be like, oh, really? I think for me that'd be a point of interest rather than fear and I guess exclusion. And I think that's the difference in perspective I have between, and this might sound offensive, but to me this is what it looks like, fetishizing a sense of community. I think communities are strong, and we need to be able to rely each other on humans, but they're not going to always be as ideal as we want them to be. There's going to be different lived experiences no matter where you go, and I think trying to fight a battle so that everyone has the same perspective is going to provide more problems to humanity than solve any, because at some point there's going to be cognitive dissonance. At some point there's going to be these differences. And if we're scared of having differences from each other, I'm not a fan of that. And I think that's what all this in-grouping is doing. We're different, so let's stay different from each other. I don't think we should stay different from each other. We can have all these different things to say about the world, but we can still work together on a very personal level. I think that's perfectly fine. So, I think that's really the 2 cents I have to share. How I believe people feel, and how I feel.
There is a fear of discomfort with being uncomfortable. However funny that sounds to say. We do almost everything within our power to be comfortable. We don't want to be put in a situation that we're not enjoying. We don't want to be offended. We don't want to be unhappy. We don't want to be unhealthy. So, and some of these are more common sense than others. And maybe they're a great ideal. Maybe this is the future of society. It's this potential comfort in our day-to-day. But in a similar train of thought to how entitlement grows, which is this coddling of children, this moving of the framework, the idea that you're not empowering your kids, because if they just cry hard enough, then you'll just give them what they want, and then they become the quote-unquote Caerans of the world, right? You can see the direct linkage there. In a similar way of thinking, something like that is happening with this in-grouping. We are so unhappy with being uncomfortable that we can never pursue any kind of truth. And maybe that's an exaggeration and an overgeneralization, but in an ideal sectarian world, that's what is a result of this. You're only discussing with people who you agree with. So every Christian only talks to other people of their same Christian sect and they all agree. Every black person, every white person, however you want to identify around one topic, if you have group norms that are set in stone and you join the group, you're going to fit right in, but you're never going to be challenged. And the only solution to that seems to be some level of individualism, some level of comfort in discomfort. Because if we don't, then we're never going to obviously unify. And you don't necessarily have to in a world, and there's no law of the universe that says humans have to get along. I think it would be a good idea, but it's not mandated. And often you see countries and states on another level form around certain identities. Although the term identity, as we're using it, wouldn't directly apply. But you see my logic there, right? Countries unify, you have national pride, even a level of jingoism in the extreme. But what happens when those groups are dividing? What happens when the state divides? What happens when the city divides? What happens when, oh, we're not a group of Christians, now we're a group of Baptists and Lutherans, a group of Southern Baptists and so forth. And then you see that happening. And in a religious sense, it doesn't have as many implications because religion is so frowned upon to talk about today. But as, let's say, race is coming to the forefront, here's a group of minorities, a group of only Mexicans, a group of only black people, a group of only black people from Chicago, a group of only Mexicans who live in the South. Or you can go to look at white people, a group of only white people from the South, only white people from Alabama. Look at Texas. They have state pride. Oh, I have Dallas pride. Well, if your pride becomes so strong that you can't even get along with everyone else, and we just continue to subdivide and subdivide, we might even have a sad irony that I've never even thought of until this point, where we just become individuals again. And maybe that's the end goal. If we just divide on every single new parameter, until we realize if we divide on every parameter, we're just people, well, fuck, maybe that's the right answer. And I know that goes against everything I've just said, but maybe that's a different path forward we haven't thought of. Maybe sectarianism is a good thing, because what if we just become so united in smaller and smaller and more narrow identities that we're just identified as ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, because I mean, I feel like that's where it's going, People want to be referred to as specific pronouns, right? They have different perspectives on the world. They feel a different way than how society, as in a larger context, has defined these things, right? All these things are pointing to is that people are individuals and they feel different, right? I think similar words were said by Jordan Peterson, and I'm not going to sit here and talk as though I agree with him on every front, but on that aspect, I think I definitely do. That a lot of these movements, or if anything, are just proving the fact that we are all individuals, and that we all want the world in a perspective that aligns with our individual experiences and views. So, I think that might be where it's headed, and maybe that level of self-actualization at the end of the day will help all of us to mature and put aside differences. I'm not sure. I think we have to put aside differences at some point, because I think, to me, it's been shown that if anything, we're only thinking more different as time progresses. I might actually challenge that as I say it, but I'll stick with it for now. It's definitely interesting. One thing I didn't touch on that you mentioned earlier, that I said I was going to make a separate video on, I'll talk about it briefly, but the whole blanket statement of, all people of this type should feel this way, right? I think that is the stupidest nonsense I've ever heard. Oh my goodness. Oh, you're black? You should feel this way because this event happened. I'm sorry, what? Since when did my skin color have to do with how I view the world? And now, the main argument against that is, well, of course, skin color has a lot to do, or I should say has a high correlation with your socioeconomic status in this world, right? It happens to be that the majority of black people in this world, right, are in Africa. And if you look in the context of the United States, I actually don't know the percentages. I might be wrong here, But as far as it's been argued, or at least how the argument looks to me, is that the majority of black people here are in less well-off positions, right? And so there does happen to be that correlation, and I will not deny the fact that economic status plays an integral part in social status, socioeconomics, obviously. And so, sure, you could argue to me that, well, there is a higher likelihood of him feeling the same way because he is black. However, making the jump and actually making the assumption, I think is just horrible. I think you can make the statement that I think there is a higher chance he'll feel the same as me because we're both black. But to actually go the extra length and then assume it, I think is insulting to the individual that you're trying to connect with. Especially on something like skin color. Especially because I feel like for many years we've been trying to get rid of the differences between people, yet here we are today continuing to advocate the fact that these differences is what makes it unique and special and what makes us able to unite. At least separately from each other. I think we have to get rid of this notion that, oh, you're white, you must know how I feel. Let's all share in one of the popular, I actually shouldn't say popular, but it's definitely something that goes around, is white guilt, right? Let's all atone for our sins. Now, whether or not you believe you actually sinned or not is going to be different person to person. So why everyone's a blanket statement, why a lot of people who are white are en masse kneeling down and saying, I atone for my sins, despite all of them having vastly different life experiences, baffles me. I think they need to have a backbone. And I'm not saying, oh, you need to oppress people because you have power, because you have this backbone. I think there are much smarter ways to approach these disagreements in how we think the world should be run. Definitely not saying you should atone for your sins. I mean, my humble perspective on this is that it's the same perspective, and although they're two entirely different events, it's the same that I hear some German folk look at World War II. And I want to be careful because some Germans have been looked at as what's the word I'm looking for? Completely ignorant to their past. I think there's a great middle ground. You don't have to ignore the past, but you can definitely acknowledge it and learn from it, but realize that that was a different world than what we live in today. I think we need to reach that middle ground, but people are still not reaching it because they're making the assumptions that I talked about earlier. And because of these assumptions, we're failing to listen.
What is happening today strikes me as a conflation of empowerment and patronizing people. I don't know if patrony is actually a word, but this idea that if we just feel bad and victimize people enough, it'll actually empower them to feel more equal. I don't believe that at all. With the caveat that actually having legislative change or making up for socioeconomic correlations that are in fact a direct relation to slavery, well, I think we should definitely solve that, and maybe you and I differ on the practice of how to do that, but I'm a firm believer that needs to happen. I don't know if that means reparations or not. That's a really complicated issue, but at the same time, victimizing people because of this new shared history does not empower them. It does not make you feel stronger. It doesn't make you want to earn your way through life. It doesn't motivate you. It just develops sad expectations of again, victim culture. And I don't like that this word victim has become so political now, because saying someone embraces victimhood doesn't mean or doesn't have any relation to how victimized they actually were. I mean, we could go extremes here. We could say you lived in a posh neighborhood and were never a victim of anything, and you could still have some kind of victim mindset. So we need to decouple the mindset from the lived experience first and foremost, because if you can't do that, then this conversation will just immediately piss everyone off. So the mindset needs to change. I'm a firm believer. And maybe the mindset is more rational or more reasonable if you were in fact a victim. You could make that argument. I'm not sure where I lie here. But the idea that the quote unquote ally is going to victimize people, that is a strange, ironic hypocrisy that I cannot wrap my mind around. If you've been historically oppressed and your neighborhood is seen by the banks as high risk and they won't give you loans and you have worse opportunities, and I'm sure that still exists today in many places, then you are a victim. And if you want to have a more victimized mindset, okay, you can make that argument. I'm open to that. And maybe you are, maybe you're not, and fine. Either way, it doesn't really matter from my point here. But if the quote-unquote allies, the wealthy white people who go to a BLM protest once every 4 years to seem like they're appeasing the minorities, that's nonsense. You're not doing anything. You're not helping anyone. If you want to show appreciation by saying we respect you, post a black square on Instagram, say, hey, I acknowledge things aren't perfect. Okay, that's fine. Acknowledgement's one thing. But then pretending you're empowering people by saying, oh, you poor minorities, what are we going to do to help you? That's so patronizing to me. If you want to help through legislation, help through powerful GoFundMe pages that help charities that work through alleviating economic dependencies through cities, or if you want to take this globally, through countries in Africa that have this huge Western Euro dependency even after the colonization ended, because where they get their money to build the cities up from the West, right? Mm-hmm. So there are lots of real problems and lots of real victims, and if we want to say that victims have the right to feel victimized, you know what? I think that's okay to say. And you and I may agree, we may not. But for everyone who's not actually a victim, like myself, I don't consider myself a victim of much. I had a pretty good life. I'm at a public university that costs lots of money, and yeah, I work to pay my rent, but there's worse things in the world. So I'm not going to go look down at the average minority and say, man, they're just feel so bad. They're so bad off. I should go to another protest here in 6 months to support them. Well, I know I'm rambling, but supporting people is great, and showing acknowledgement is great. And if that's posting a black square, fine. I'm fine with that. I did the same thing. But we have got to stop victimizing people. At least, here's where I'll conclude. At least those who are invoking the victimization who are not victims, like myself. If I were to victimize you as an Asian during a time of the China virus, right? That's unacceptable. If you feel victimized and you want to express that, I think that's fine. And maybe my opinion will waver there. But I shouldn't be victimizing you, because how patronizing is that?
So on the topic of victimhood, right? I'm going to go on a little spiel here. Afterwards, I'm going to talk about another term that I think has lost a lot of its prior meaning. What is the word? It's another popular word to describe something that you have that others don't. Oh, privilege. That's the word. I'm going to go on a whole rant about privilege too after this. But to the first part about victimhood, it's kind of crazy because there's a huge number of people that look at these problems and think that in order to solve them, they have to approach it using what they think is the morally correct answer, right? Instead of actually looking at what's wrong, we're looking at what we think is wrong, right? And I'm going to say, at least maybe not include you, Colton, but myself, because, and I'll get into this word soon. Privilege, I feel privileged, or maybe I don't feel privileged, but by many people I would be privileged, I should say. It's kind of our and sometimes this is also made a racial thing. The white man's burden, I believe it's called. We have to look out for those underneath us. I think that's a totally convoluted way of thinking and doesn't solve anything in the way that we're approaching it today, which is pity, like you stated. And I think I'm of the opinion, I think enough of experiencing the things that I have and reading about the things I have, I think handouts are also a double-edged, or a double-sided blade, I believe it's called. You can only, it's the old saying of give a man a fish versus teaching him how to fish, right? I mean, everyone says it, and it's a popular argument on the right side of the aisle. But I mean, just by experiencing people, I think you can find that to be true. You can give someone as much as you want. If they don't have a sense of duty, or they don't have a sense of accomplishment, then all they're going to do is accept what you give them and not get it themselves. And that can be a culture thing, I believe. A sense of duty, or a sense of accomplishment, or achieving great things. I think that can totally be argued as a cultural thing, and something that a lot of Americans might be lacking as a foundational aspect to their culture. And I'm not even going to even tie it to any race. There's plenty of white people who who I guess get babysat their entire lives, So victimizing, I don't think, is the key. I think we can all agree that these disparities might be a problem, but I think where a lot of Americans disagree is how we get rid of that disparity. A lot of people are saying, work hard, get it done yourself. Others are saying we need to pander to them. And it's quite interesting, because when I look at both arguments, we need to take care of them versus they need to work hard. It's looking at the problem from an idealistic lens, right? Both sides are looking at the problem of these disparities from the supposed best world. All people should care about should all care about the lower classes. And the other side is saying all people should be hardworking. And so I think there's actually an issue on both ends of the argument that assume that all humans are the same in that regard, when in fact there are lots of cultural differences across all the people in America. You can't just assume, now, I believe hardworking is a great trait to have as a human. It might be called something else across different cultures, but, in the idea that it is portrayed from the right, typically, in America, you can't just assume that everyone has that feeling or has that urge. Likewise, on the left, you can't just assume that every rich person should care about the poor. I mean, it might be moral, but, so many things are subjective in that argument that I find it hard to reach a consensus there and actually fight for what's just. Because you have people that say we shouldn't be handing them out things. And so I think there's a lot of weird stuff going on there, and I think we're looking at it at too idealistic of a level. We got to really just get to know each other and figure out what the heck people are actually saying and how they feel, instead of flaunting these ideals and saying that obviously it's the correct answer when there's no way in hell you're going to practice it. There's no way in hell you're going to convince the other 48, 49, 50% of Americans who think we should just work hard that we need to hand out, and likewise for the other side. So what the heck are we going to do? I think the answer lies in, well, let's actually understand what the problem is. And I think we're a little too loose in defining what the problem is. Oh, there's poor people. Is that necessarily a problem? I mean, some people will say yes, but some will say others will say no. And I think that's a problem within itself, that we disagree whether or not being poor is an issue. Now, if you need me to remind you any of this after I talk about all this, feel free to ask, because I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here to another term. You brought up victimhood. I think privilege is another term that has been twisted every which way in the modern political theater. I hate the term privilege now. because it seems like no matter how you think about it, everyone has like tens of thousands of privileges. And I think that's when it loses its meaning. I had a lecture here at Boulder, actually, about privilege. And, it took the place of one of my astrophysics classes. And it was a Friday, and we were ahead of schedule. And so instead of our typical, talking about planets and stars and galaxies, we talked about privilege. And it was the most interesting thing to sit in. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I disagreed with all of it. But they coined privilege as something that someone has that not everyone gets, right? And that makes perfect sense. I think I agree with that definition. I might have one of them was able-bodied privilege, right? The ability to walk around freely and use all my limbs. And some people are born quadriplegic or become quadriplegic, or one-handed or two-handed, all of that. But I feel like it's starting to lose its meaning when we use privilege as a means of justifying our stance on political problems. I think privilege is... I don't think privilege discounts someone's ideas, but I do think it shapes their perspectives. It's definitely used as an insult nowadays, unfortunately. Posted it, but it was talking about Latinx, right? And how it's the stupidest term they've ever heard of as a Latino person.
Latinx is how it would be said.
Latinx, yeah. I think Latinx is actually the more insulting way of just making fun of the term, right?
Right. Although ironically, it does flow better.
It does. It does.
Which is unfortunate.
But he's making fun of it, right? And whether or not I agreed with him up until this certain point in the video doesn't matter. But at a certain point, he started talking about how white privileged people are the problem behind it. And I was like, well, I think privilege is such a horrible word to use here. I think the better word to use is naive. Honestly, I think privilege is being thrown around too much. Like, oh, you have all this privilege, therefore you're going to think A and B. Not necessarily. I think that by virtue of having a lot of wealth, potentially you don't have the experiences that would give you the insight that other people might have into the nitty-gritty realities of the world. And I don't think that makes you less of a person, but it definitely makes you naive when you try to talk about social problems. And that's what this person was talking about in their video. And at the end of the day, yeah, I just hate the way the word privilege is being thrown around.
I want to talk about privilege. I like that train of thought you're on. Real quick before I do, I want to clarify something that I alluded to. Because at the start of this, I alluded to saying that even the out-group should have a voice in discussing topics. The white person can quote data about minority groups, for example. But then I also said white people shouldn't spend their time victimizing, going to protest to make everyone see them as better. So I want to narrow down that these don't necessarily conflict with one another. If you're a scientist and you have data on, like I said, minority relations, you should have that voice. I want to make it clear that I'm saying this. Even if you're not a scientist, anyone should be a part of this dialogue because perspectives are invaluable. However, it is likely easier and I think more dangerous if those who do have a higher opportunity to give a voice, those who are less impacted, try to then dictate how everyone should feel in this other group, let's say the minority group, then that's a problem. I want to make that quick clarification because I don't think I really had any nuance in describing how those two are not necessarily overlapping. But to your point about privilege, the scientist is a great example. Who is the most able to discuss climate change? Probably a climate scientist. I don't know many climate scientists who live in poverty. They might exist, and I might be totally ignorant. but they're going to be privileged in some sense. And they might have been privileged to get to that position. They might have had a better socioeconomic background. I'm sure the correlations are very high here. But to be clear, and this really ties into the point I just made, having privilege shouldn't make you the bad guy. It shouldn't discount your voice. It shouldn't discount your opinion. It definitely shouldn't discount your statistics, because the idea that statistics are more or less true depending on who presents them makes zero sense.
Yeah.
None. And I don't say that from a political background. There's no bias here. The idea that numbers are different based on who reads them out loud is idiotic. However, of course, I want to acknowledge that, well, some people couldn't be the scientists. They didn't grow up in a community where that's possible. That's fair. But it shouldn't discount at least data at a minimum. That's my minimum bar. I'm open-minded for the rest. You can't discount data, right? And to your point about privilege, I think the word ignorance, it makes more sense in my eyes than naive, but they might be synonymous, really. Because the issue is we have to decide what we're arguing. Are we arguing that we need absolute equity and the idea of equality of outcome? Something of a idealistic communism, and I don't say communism with any negative weight in this scenario. This may be anarcho-communism in an ideal light. Is that the goal? Because if that's the goal, then okay, privilege is a problem. But if the goal isn't absolute equity, if the goal is just better standards for everyone in a capitalist system, let's say, but those with better standards are ignorant of those that have worse standards, if the education system isn't teaching them everything they need to know, then that's a different solution, a different approach to find this solution, you might say. Now, I'm a believer that the latter is more reasonable, it's more practical. I don't know of anarcho-communist states on a large scale that can function. And I know many people, Antifa is the great example here, who would say, well, maybe if we fight for this, it can happen. I'm not convinced that's the case. But either way, I agree. This ignorance or naivety or naivete, however you say that, really is the issue. But first and foremost, we have to decide what we are actually, quote unquote, fighting for in this progressive agenda or in this liberal agenda, however you want to phrase it. I'm open-minded.
Yeah, that is exactly it. That actually, after all of this talking, right, this hour or so of talking, I think I didn't think about it until just now, but this is the entire point of everything I've thought about. I don't understand what the heck people are fighting for. And if I don't understand that, I will never be able to reason with their approaches. So, there's this Stop Asian Hate, right? There's Black Lives Matter. Here's the thing, if what you're fighting for is to end racism or racial bias or racial hate, calling people out, and I hate to say this, but this is argumentative speech 101, right? This is leadership 101. This is the most fundamental thing you need to know about how to convince people of your cause. Telling them that they're wrong to their face and that they need to reevaluate everything in their lives is the worst way to convince someone anything, right? That's like walking up to someone and saying, you're stupid and wrong on a fundamental level. Change it. They're not going to change it unless their life depends on it. With freedom of expression and freedom of thought on the level that we have in this country, you actually need to give credence to the opposing view, not necessarily because they're right, but because there are plenty of reasons why someone believes something and we can't discredit them. Otherwise, they're going to feel attacked, right? As much as I think we need to grow up and get over the fact that just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean they think you're stupid, or you should think you're stupid because someone disagrees with you. The matter of the fact is that's the majority of people, and I'm in that majority some of the time, depending on what we're talking about. Like my favorite TV show, If there's a show I love and I just absolutely adore it and someone says it's stupid, of course I'm going to be hard pressed to be convinced otherwise. The only way you're going to convince me that, oh yeah, maybe the show does have downsides, is if you tell me, yeah, you know what, there are good things to this show, and here's all of those, but here's the bad. There's a 10 trillion% chance more that I will actually change my mind just a little bit. So, if the goal is to stop racism as a mentality, we are doing it completely wrong. Unfortunately, you have to hear people out and you have to figure out where they're coming from before you can tell them they're wrong. Just telling them they're wrong is not going to change anything. As far as I understand how to convince people in human psychology. So, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what BLM and Stop Asian Hate are trying to do. You know, and unfortunately, I actually think that racists are a minority in this. Or fortunately, not unfortunately. Let me correct myself there. I am not. I am very happy there are less racists in this country than that there is a minority of them. Using a classical definition of racism, I should say. And so the people who carry out these acts, like the, what was it? What date was the spa shootings committed on? I can't remember exactly, but...
sometime in mid-March of 2021.
Yeah, was it in Arkansas? Where was it?
It was Atlanta.
Atlanta. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. I can't believe I forgot all that, because it's recent news, and I've been seeing it everywhere, in everything I try to do. The Atlanta spa shootings, right? The people who carry those kind of acts out are so far gone, you're not going to convince them anyways, in my humble opinion. This might be where my human psychology knowledge fails me. Perhaps there is a way we could save them. But is it worth it, right? And I don't think someone who's willing to go out of their way to kill 8 people, 6 of them happening to be Asian, whether that's racially motivated, we don't know yet. And for people to claim that it is, I think is absolute nonsense. I'm going to get a lot of flack for that. But it might look like it's racially motivated, and a lot of evidence might suggest, okay, this could be, because why else would he go to spas in particular, right? Maybe he fetishizes Asian women, but we don't know for certain. And even if it was, I don't know what would transpire of that. What makes psychopaths less likely to kill racist or people based on race? I mean, you're arguing about psychopathy there, so I don't understand. But that's really my biggest frustration. I don't understand the point of a lot of these arguments, and I think before I can even believe in any of them, I need to understand the cornerstone of their movement.
Let me say something that's going to sound totally outrageous and pessimistic and unhopeful, but hear me out. Nobody seems to know anything about anybody, including themselves. However dumb that sounds, nobody, and maybe nobody's the wrong word. Maybe the news is only covering the fringe for economic reasons. I'm obviously biased in my perspective here, but as far as I can tell, just from a combination of, again, news, whether that's New York Times and Wall Street Journal, or whether that's CNN and Fox, or whether that's day-to-day conversation in classes, it doesn't matter. Nobody seems to be able to empathize with the other side, to your point. No one seems to know what it means to be economically conservative if you're not, or what it means to support the military if you just see the military as imperialist. No one seems to be able to empathize, first and foremost. And obviously that's a two-way road. But the crazier thing, and people are going to totally disagree, I suspect, but I have seen this so many times. Nobody seems to know what they're arguing for. There's just bandwagoning, and this ties into our identity politics, that if you join a group because you view it as, let's say, morally superior, then you're not even joining for one reason, one policy. You're joining for 0 reasons of policy. It's hilarious. You see people going, whether it's to right-wing far right political protests or far left. And obviously these are edited when they're on video, but then they interview people and say, hey, what are you fighting for? Let's say it's equality or supremacy or something. And they say, why is that? It's just the way it is. Or that's, as we know, it's correct. Or as our founding fathers said, or as society thinks.
It's the right thing to do.
Right.
Like, well,
no one seems to understand what the hell they actually think. And that is the most foundational, obviously, clearly not obvious, how obvious it is, understanding that we must have. And then, of course, we must also have empathy.
Yeah.
Because if we cannot even understand ourselves, how are we supposed to have conversation? Because those who have listened to this podcast know that you and I both, Caelan, are big proponents of free speech. I don't think absolute free speech is a good idea. I don't think you do either. For example, copyright law and things like that. And we may draw the line slightly different, but generally speaking, dialogue allows the best ideas to come forward. And I'm hopeful in some sense that through continuing dialogue, we will get better answers. But having two people who don't understand each other, well, okay, maybe that dialogue can help build that understanding. But if they don't understand themselves first, they don't know what they're arguing for, or more importantly, why they're arguing for it. That's the kicker. Then there is no chance of finding common ground unless we can be consistent and understand what we think. And here's an explicit example to touch on why consistency is important in that. Look at Trump's statement of the Chinese virus. We see the COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, originally nCoV 2019 before it was official, right? It has these different names for different reasons. And then Trump calls it a China virus or Chinese virus. And some large portion of the U.S., if not the world, get really pissed off at that. And fine, you could say, well, Trump says things that are not good. He's not careful with his words. He's a little bit racist. We have behind-the-scenes footage from his TV show that shows he's a bigot. Fine, you can say all of these things. But let's pin down the truth here. The common understanding is that we are arguing against his statement that calling something a China virus leads to Asian hate, which we need to stop, which is the common phrase today, stop Asian hate. Well, I feel bad for Spain, because the Spanish flu, which we still call the Spanish flu in our day-to-day life, started in America. It's not conclusive, but most of the evidence I've seen shows that it started somewhere in America in a rural town, and then they went to their military boot camp, and it spread from there. But no countries wanted to cover that because they didn't want to seem weak in the war. And Spain was relatively neutral. They covered it in the news, and it was coined the Spanish virus. And I'm making this comparison because this is one example where we are arguing against Trump, someone who you can make a lot of strong arguments against for a number of reasons. And I would agree with a lot of them, certainly. But then we take this one claim and say this is the worst, it's racist towards Asians. But then if you ask someone why is it racist towards Asians, and then bring up why isn't the Spanish flu racist towards Spaniards, no one's going to know why there's a distinction. And I'm not even going to claim there's no distinction. Now, I don't see it, but there very well may be a distinction. Maybe it's because of our international relations problems with China. That's a distinction. Fine. But no one makes that argument. The argument in this one example, and there's thousands of examples. In this one example, the argument is, well, that's racist because it's offensive. But the Spanish flu isn't because I don't know why. Well, that's not sufficient for dialogue because now you're not allowing someone else to empathize with you, which is the second part. Because they can't empathize with you if you don't even know why you think something. Does that tangent make sense?
Yes. So another thing, I think I talked to you about this, recently, off the cuff, you were just like eating dinner or something. The whole Chinese virus example that you brought up. I'll even talk more in depth about that, right? So when we talk about people saying, well, labeling it the Chinese virus is racist, right? Well, maybe it is. It's factual, unfortunately. It did originate in China, and I actually don't know if it was in Wuhan, but at least that's where it was first, en masse reported. People who are upset at Asians, right, or at least people who they think are Chinese, I think it's justified 100%. Honestly, this is going to be controversial, but they care about their families, at least on the onset. Nowadays, God knows what people want anymore. My friend was telling me he was at work and people pull down their masks to talk to each other and then pull them back up and go back to work. I'm like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But I don't know what people want anymore. But at least at the onset, with the initial shock value, there is a lot of people who may have been who are most likely more conservative. They would look at Asian people and think negatively because it originated from China, right? That is congruent with everything we knew then. And it's not because they hate Asians that they would look at them in a negative light. It's because there's been this correlation made between who carries the sickness, and that happened to be Chinese people. At least that was the mentality. And so the problem wasn't that there was racial issues. Oh, I hate you because you're Asian. It was fear of a virus. And so I think a big problem is people are conflating this inherently racist idea with something that just happens to be correlated with race. And let me let me elaborate on that. I could be scared of someone because of X, Y, and Z. And if those things happen to be tied to race, you can perhaps make the presumption that it is because of their race that I'm scared of that. But I think they are mutually exclusive, right? I don't hate Asian people. I hate the virus, but Asian people happen to carry it. And so when I see an Asian person, I'm Asian myself, so I'm not going to talk here as though I believe these things, but hypothetically, right? If I were to see an Asian, there's a higher likelihood in my head that I associate them with a virus. That I would hope that doesn't make me racist, because we've been told that it came from China. However, some people have conflated this with racism. And so when we try to solve the problem, we say we need to stop racism. How about we stop the presumptions that are leading to racism, which is, it's only Asian people that carry it. Well, let's just educate people instead of calling them racist. It's the same thing. My mom, I'm going to stop using my mom as examples, actually, because I've roasted her enough in this podcast, and I love her to death. So I'll spare her this time. I'll spare you this time, Mom. I'll use another example. Let's say there's someone who looks at black people in a negative way, right? Let's say that one of their core values is hard work. And unfortunately, with African Americans in America, there is a correlation between not being well off and being black, right? The majority of black people are not in well off economic situations. And so when this person would see a black person, they're going to see poor, I don't know how else to phrase it. That maybe was bad in terms of explaining the scenario, but they're going to look at this person and see, perhaps a lack of hard work. And what happens is the correlation is then drawn between something against the person's morals, which is lack of hard work, and black. And so now you think they're racist because it looks like they're going directly to hating black. But really the foundation of it is a correlation that we've made. And so I think what needs to happen is that there just needs to be more honest dialogue about who people really are. And that doesn't happen with identity politics, I'll tell you what. You're not going to get the full picture of who someone is when all they do is flaunt one aspect of who they are. And so our modern political dialogue has done a fantastic job of removing the context behind everyone's lives. And so now this person who isn't really racist starts looking like they're racist because they made the correlation. And it's not because they hate black people, it's because they don't like people who don't work hard. And that could be anyone, regardless of race. But unfortunately, in America, the majority of black people are not well off. Not to say that they aren't hardworking, but in this person's case, they might see that as not hardworking. So, when I think about the psychology of it, I think that there is actually less and less people who are racist in my head, and more people who make these correlations, and it's assumed to be racism. And I think that is one of the biggest problems with dialogue today. We assume you don't like people because you inherently don't like them, but I think there's underlying reasons for that. And if we can dispel that, the racism will subsequently fall, right? Because I don't think anymore that people advocate slaves or treating others worse just because of skin color. I think that's a dying mentality, and I think statistics are showing that.
Well, to that point, real quick, as far as I can tell, most of the white supremacist groups would be more in favor of just deporting people who aren't original founders of this nation. Africans, for example, which I happen to not support on so many levels, because I think that's obnoxiously terrible. But I don't think most support slavery, but I could be wrong. Maybe they do. But really, we have to define our terms, though, because in your thoughts there, if we approach this psychologically, then what we're going to find most likely, and I'm a pretty firm believer in this, is that most racists, I shouldn't say most, but many racists are going to have a reason for it. Just like many Christians have a reason for being Christian. And then in some case, and maybe this trend also applies to the racists, they won't have a why anymore. But seemingly, I don't think that it applies here as much, because racists are a dying breed in some sense, that they have to have good reason for it, at least in their own perception. Otherwise, they will lose to the societal peer pressure of moral superiority in some sense. So my suspicion is that most people who are racist, and to use, again, like you said, the classical term, someone who views other ethnicities as inferior, that they probably have a reason for it. But then we have to decide what we're fighting for. Because if you don't call them racists anymore, we just say, oh, they're people with skewed perceptions, which you can make that claim, then nobody's racist, minus a few people who don't have that why, which I think, again, is a smaller portion of this group, because of how they need to justify their means at this point. So we have to decide what's the problem. And this is one danger I see, again, with identity politics, or with the apparent ability to change the meaning of terms to fit certain group identities. I was in a class and taught by a very respectful professor, and I have no complaints about the class at all. However, I did find it a little bit interesting, and at worst disheartening somewhat, but probably just interesting, that we were studying the term racism and how it affects politics today. It was a political class, political psychology class, actually. And the phraseology we used, based on some political scholar, I don't remember whose teachings we followed exactly in our course, the term racist we were learning was new racism, and it enveloped anyone who was against affirmative action. And I even told the professor this, and again, it was cordial, respectful, no harm here, but I brought forth this idea that, well, if we define everyone who's against affirmative action as racist, which is a term that has the same weight now as it always has, and also envelops a group of real racists, if we want to use that term loosely, now you have coined a term that envelops half the country, give or take. I don't know how many people are against affirmative action exactly, but now half the country is a racist. Good luck unifying now. I don't see a path forward to unify if you're going to call them something that historically was so terrible. The idea that if you just went to Germany and said, do you support free speech? And then, well, you must be a Nazi, because Germans that were Nazis supported free speech. If you make this kind of gap, you have a real problem. So, while I agree with most of what you said, that's a key point I want to bring up. Tying back to knowledge, that we have to be able to identify what exactly we're arguing. And real quick, another point that I would be remiss if I didn't mention. I think we shouldn't fail to acknowledge that while saying China virus or Chinese virus or what have you is something synonymous with the Spanish flu, as I said, if it becomes part of the nomenclature, I acknowledge that there is the problem of people with skewed perceptions in some way saying, oh, I don't agree with this, or I like this kind of seemingly racist saying because of my preconceived notions. But that allows people who are quote-unquote real racists, and we haven't really defined that well yet, that allows them to feel more comfortable to speak up too. And that is a potential danger, and I just want to acknowledge that as well.
I'm actually glad you hit on my argument in the ways that you did, because, now that I think about, I'm not really a fan of calling racist people with skewed perspectives, right? Because why they believe what they believe doesn't necessarily discredit the fact that they believe something that just isn't good, right? I think I agree with the perspective that, well, it's bad no matter what the root of it is. So I agree with that. I think it's fine to still call them racist, right? It's still fine to look at them in a negative light, just based on their actions and how they treat others, which is uncalled for, but uncalled for at least. But that isn't to say we should immediately discredit everything else they stand for, right? And why they might believe that way. So I'm glad you bring that up. I think there is a nuance there, in my humble opinion, of saying, look, this is awful at some point along the line of discourse, and making sure that that's defined. So your point after that, however, about actually defining, what a hardcore, in air quotes, a hardcore racist, right? In this particular case, would I call someone who calls people racial slurs on a daily basis a racist? I think that just about crosses the line of racist. However, let me clarify. If they're doing it in a belittling way to come across as superior or to make someone feel inferior, I think that crosses the line of racist.
Let me really understand what you mean then.
Yeah.
Because do you think it's possible to call someone a racial slur in a not belittling way that would make them not a racist?
Yeah. It happens. The N-word, right? Gosh, what a fascinating word. What can I say about that? I think we already had an episode on that. I think, or
we've certainly touched on it.
Yeah. What a freaking word, right? I even hesitate to say it. I just wish it would be deleted off the face of the planet at this point. Just get rid of it. It's too annoying to deal with, in my humble opinion. Anyways, that word. Some people use it colloquially as a form of, almost kinship, and so an interesting repurposing of that word, for sure. But I think intention matters a lot when you're talking and when you're trying to convey ideas. And you can definitely tell intention when something as simple as a colloquialism, right, or a simple phrase is used, because you can often see the context and you can often see the intentions of the person who spoke them, right? That's conveyed through mood and the way they say it, and their overall expression, which is fortunate. So, I do think we need to make that separation there. Now, that happens to be the only example. I mean, maybe there's a couple others, but they're not as nearly profound as the N-word. So,
well, on the topic of the N-word is a great example here. let's touch on speech a little bit, because although we often tie this into this podcast in many different episodes, it kind of is the point of this podcast, is to discuss free speech and how to effectively approach that. So I'm going to tie it in again here as well. This is one great example, being the N-word, where you have a different standard of what free speech is allowed for different people. And again, maybe that's good. I'm not actually stating one way or another. But how do you feel about that? That because of a historical reason, that's the main argument, because of a historical oppression in which this word was often used, is it a problem for these same ancestors, the European ancestors who were slave owners hundreds of years ago, or their family members were, let's say, their ancestors were? Is it a problem that they're using these words every now and then? And do we need to continue to disallow that? And to take that point a step further, if you think that's the case, do you think we should not allow them to say it in movies or in books? Because there's examples of, I think it was Leonardo DiCaprio in what movie was he a slave owner? In Django Unchained, where there were some, although I suspect a loud minority of people, who said he shouldn't even be allowed to say it as an actor, acting as a slave owner, because it's the 21st century, the movie just needs to not allow that. Now, again, obviously it aired, as far as I can tell, it was successful, so that must have been a small minority. But if you think that as well, feel free to extrapolate on your thoughts there.
I'll give my idealistic answer and then my realistic answer. So, I wish we would just get rid of the word and stop using it altogether, right? There's too much historical context behind that word, and it's so confusing that honestly, I think America would be better off just not using that word ever again, no matter its context. Like, having to check yourself and having to think, am I in the right context? We do that enough with plenty of other words in this language. Why keep adding them? You know, we already have terms for referring to people who, with a sense of kinship. You know, brother, family, cousin. You know, we have plenty of words to use already, and I understand that the context may elevate it to a next level of kinship, but I don't think it gets much more closer than blood family. You know, it doesn't get much more closer than calling someone brother or something like that, despite being entirely unrelated to each other. You know, so I think we already have our bases covered for different levels of kinship, and you know, really, it's just the result of a culture of people growing in America that want to feel different than the rest of America. I honestly think that's what it is. It happens to be tied to race. The black community, you know, they want to use it exclusively in the context of kinship and, you know, friendliness, and not allow that anywhere else. I don't exactly know the motivations for wanting to feel unique in that aspect or repurpose the word. But as a whole, you know, I'm tired of it. But realistically, I think everyone should be able to say it, right? Whether it's Django Unchained and it's Leonardo DiCaprio posing as a slave owner, or it's some guy on the street, black, white, Mexican, Spanish, Japanese, I don't care. You know, to outlaw a word or to say that this word is bad and remove the context behind why someone said it is super dangerous.
I wonder if there's a middle ground here then, because most people, I think if you really dug down, would say that it's damaging to say this word in some way or another if you are white, let's say, and you're talking to a black person, or even if you're white talking to a white person. Now, the argument isn't quite as clear there, but it's an argument that's made, and fair enough. But I always think long term. That's how I approach these topics, because I'm optimistic in some sense that, we will become equal if we're not already. We will have better access where everyone has the same opportunities. And pretending not is just perpetuating your own problems. So the fact that people don't think this far ahead really, really bothers me in some sense. But that's aside from the point. if we get to a point where everyone is totally equal, do you think that then having a word or multiple words, if it gets to that point, which I don't think it would, but at least a word or a form of speech that is exclusive to one group, that is no longer an oppressed group, do you think that is an issue? Or do you think it's still okay to acknowledge history, a few hundred years in the past, a few thousand if it takes us that long to really get absolute equality of opportunity? Is that a problem because we're equal now? Or do you think it's fair enough because even if it was 1,000,000 years ago, that's not a history that my ancestors had, whereas yours did?
Right. Um, you know, I'm in a weird spot at this point, right? Because I'm in a leadership class. I think I say that I've said this in the last like 3 episodes. Funnily enough, it's just too interesting to ignore all the juicy content that comes out of it. But and hearing from my professor all of her experiences with other cultures, it allows me to respect it more. However, it's tough because it's all, we're all in the same country and we all speak the same language. And so in my mind, it's hard to differentiate when our bounds are the same, right? When supposedly we live in the same society, right? Now, I honestly think there's a rift growing between, the West, the East, and the Midwest, and even the South, right? I think they're starting to harbor different mentalities. They have been harboring different mentalities towards all these problems. Hence why they already have names. You have like the Rust Belt. You have
The Bible Belt.
the Bible Belt, right? You have all these things to denote a population of people that tend to, have the same circumstances in life. So, I'm on the fence with this one. I want to sit there and say, I respect that that's your culture, but also we're both American. Shouldn't we be harboring the kind of same ideals? I'm not sure if we want cohesion. It definitely looks like we don't, despite that being something that people say they argue for. The contradictions in a lot of modern progressive left ideals is that, we should unify, but also people should be unequal, right? In the most basic sense that we're just different from skin color, therefore we should have different customs and norms. I disagree with that, but I want to respect it. So I'm not sure where I stand. I'm on the fence.
I'm actually somewhat skeptical, however strange this might sound, that if we have a society based on identity politics, which, as you've heard, I don't think is a super effective way to unify, but if that is our society, and then if I was wrong, and it does lead to a sense of equality for everyone, or at least perceived equality, right? This idea that every human views every other human as inherently equal in value. If that does happen against my best intuitions, do you think it's possible that we will make the jump from inherent equality of spirit, if you want to call it, of every other human, to the inherent equality of outcome or even opportunity? Because if we're all different, and this is going to sound hard to understand, and I hope I can explain this effectively, but if we are all different in some way, there's minor genetic differences in height, and we know height has a positive correlation with respect for leaders, for example. Or if there's minor differences in something like IQ, which is extremely controversial, and I hope that through equal opportunity that dissipates, or else we'll likely have a rise in racism again. So I hope that doesn't happen. But whatever the differences are, or cultural differences, or one group values family units more, or one group values individual materialistic wealth more. If every group views every other group as totally equal, again, even in this sectarian society, I am not wholeheartedly convinced that we would naturally, intuitively have a society with equal outcome in some sense. And this is something you've brought up, just again, you and I discussing from, I think you said a speaker you listened to or a class you were in, about how equality and fairness aren't always the same. And the easiest example in my eyes is wealth. If everyone's doing slightly better through capitalism, but the wealth gap is getting larger, then is that good? Is that bad? What does that look like for everyone, right? So I wonder, to pick your brain a little bit, do you parallel my worry, or do you envision a remedy that even in this society that you and I think won't bring equality, if it does bring this equality, or at least this shared mutual respect for every other human, will we actually in practice perceive ourselves as equal if my culture, for example, doesn't value money as much, or your culture doesn't value 9 to 5 as much because you prefer time spent with your family? I don't even know if it's possible to have an idealistic equal outcome. And if we can't discover a path forward, and hopefully you have a counter here, and hopefully you have this path forward, if we can't discover that, then really, to my point made maybe half an hour ago, what are we fighting for? Because right now we're fighting for a range from, seemingly equal or seemingly respectful to total absolute outcome equality. That's a range of options. And if we can't narrow that down, how will we ever know when we achieved our goal? I'm not convinced we will.
So I think I do have an answer. It's going to sound, it is sinister, unfortunately, but I think it's brainwashing, because everyone is going to have to value the same pursuit in life in order for everyone to decide the same outcome for themselves, right? And this is ignoring whether or not you can even choose for yourself the outcome you want. So I think it would be brainwashing, right? So if we want 50% of women in one field and 50% men in one field, right, the same field, well, 50% of women who choose to go, or are, how do I want to phrase this? There needs to be an equal amount of women who decide for themselves that they want to go into that field as men, right? And the only way that's going to happen is if unanimously men and women in this society, whatever fictional society we're talking about, both value this, whatever this job gives them, right? For aerospace, maybe a sense of discovery or intrigue in space, right? And in my opinion, that's, you can't get to that point without brainwashing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the government tells you what to like. It can be that a social norm is ingrained in the fabric of a society so much that exactly 50% of women decide that they like aerospace, right? It's already happened. A lot of women choose to take care of families. I mean, it's partly biological too, in my humble opinion. Or not even that. I think there's some studies that show that this motherly mentality, is something that only obviously mothers could harbor. The female in the human race. So I think it's already happened. But if we want that, you're going to have to figure out how to convince 50% of women that is a path in life that they would like to choose. Because I don't think if you left it up in the air, everyone would magically decide to like the same things equally as each other. Especially if we're talking about this world that you've conjured up where, everyone has agreed that we're all equal, but we believe different things fundamentally. What they choose to pursue is going to be a different thing across each culture. The one that values family units, maybe the females, right, or whatever they decide is the caregiver of the family, decides to stay home and not work. And what if that happens to be mostly females? Well, someone from another society is going to look at that and say, that's messed up. That's not equal. But I'm glad you brought up when I talked about equality and fairness, because to them it might not be equal, but it's fair because they chose that and they want that. The classic example that my professor gave me was candy. You have equal and fair. Everyone gets one piece of candy. End of discussion, right? Oh, well, that's fair. And it's equal. Fantastic. And then you have equal but not fair, right? What was the example? she used for this. I might not remember it exactly, but equal, not fair might be no one gets a piece of candy, right? Oh, well, that sucks. What the heck? I mean, we're all the same, but why aren't we getting candy? And then not equal and not fair might be Jimmy gets 100 because I like Jimmy, you know? And it's all about understanding what's fair to people. And I think that's going to be different for every individual, you know? Because life experience, unless we can somehow all live the same life in the Matrix or something, or in some sort of dystopian futuristic society. And unfortunately, those things don't sound really good. But that's the only way I can picture that society arising.
Yeah, and the word brainwashing is a very heavily weighted term. But I think even aside from any connotation from that, I know what you mean. I think people listening will know what you mean. This idea that, let's just call it convincing, just for simplicity's sake.
Yeah.
You have to either convince or be in one of the parallel universes of the multiverse that happens to have neurology work in a totally shared collective consciousness that all works as a connected set of roots, like you see in some very large tree systems in certain regions, where they're all actually the same embodiment of consciousness, if you want to use these high-level words. So unless you live in that universe, then you would have to convince people or persuade people or brainwash people, if you want to use that terminology. Because otherwise, you're going to be stuck in differences. Cultural differences, to your point, fairness differences, because that's a great point. And this is a challenge we see today in a number of cases. Let's look at religious. You have World Hijab Day. People who identify as progressive and liberal in America, let's say, would say, well, we need to have a World Hijab Day to say that we shouldn't have bigotry towards Muslim women because of their hijab. But at the same time, there are many of Muslim women in certain regions. I'm not saying all Muslims. I'm not condemning Muslims in any way. No bigotry. But there are individuals in these cases who want to be able to have the right to drive a car or to have the same legal standing in trial as men do, or want to not be forced to wear burqas even, depending on where you are in the world. So there's an interesting dynamic here where, first of all, we have to decide, is someone's perception considered fair? You know, do people, this is just one example, women in theocratic Islamic states, do they think it's actually in their best interest to be forced to wear certain things or have certain jobs? And the same could be said for traditional Christian homes. Should women be better suited for the home? And do they think that's okay? Because that's an important perspective here for equality and fairness, actually. But if then they say, yes, this is fair, I feel like it's fair, then we have to decide, how is this fairness attributed? You know, is it entirely free will? Is it the case that, as we're learning, free will is not as free as we think? We are influenced so much by our environment. So now are they brainwashed to think that it's fair? Maybe, maybe not. And then if it was some kind of convincing, do you regulate that? Do you regulate what's perceived as fair? If so, who regulates it? And then we're back in a fiction book of dystopia, as however many of those exist. It seems to be this never-ending cycle of understanding what's fair. And even if all of society agrees that it's fair, whether you want to call it brainwashing or even just natural inclinations of society, that everyone gets along, Christians get along with Muslims, and everyone's happy at some point. Okay, fine, we all feel fair. But what's the chance that we're also all exactly equal?
Right.
About as close to zero as you can get.
Exactly.
That's my inclination.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right there. You know, I think about it this way. When I picture a dystopian society, not even dystopian, perhaps maybe utopian society, depending on your perspective, in my head, related to this exact discussion, you know, imagine being a woman and they're like, hi, you can have the choice of being beat by your husband every day and being completely submissive to him. Or, you know, you can do this, or, you know, chase your own dreams and be independent. Or you can have, the middle ground. Maybe you have a husband. Some days he's a jerk. Some days he's really nice. He's human. Whatever.
And are you saying that middle ground is also a possibility for
Yes,
Muslims?
yeah,
Or are you saying Muslims are only beating their wives? I just want to be clear here. Your phrasing.
I'm not technically talking about Muslims here either.
Okay.
Right? Just like maybe any woman in this futuristic society is given that choice.
I thought that was the case, but I wanted to be clear that for those listening,
glad you're clarifying.
I figured you didn't mean that all Islamic followers just beat their wives.
No,
men. I assumed you weren't saying that.
Especially with how broadly we define followership of a religion, that would be outrageous of me to claim.
Okay.
So, given that those choices in some far distant society, I wonder how many people would actually choose those different paths. If you had equal access to all of them, I can, like you said, I can almost guarantee that there's a 0% chance that y'all filter into the same thing. Right? And if they do, oh great, we found the answer.
Well, that's true, right? If we are wrong about our intuitions, if we get to a society where everyone feels fair, well, either that everyone feels fair regardless of equality, and then that's sustainable, well, that's great, or where they have absolute equality of outcome and it also feels fair, which the latter is likely a 1-to-1 outcome of the former. Although, well, maybe that's not actually true. But nonetheless, presuming that's the case, that's another option. Then this conversation is just a thought experiment, and someday we'll prove it wrong. Mm-hmm. That would be awesome. But presuming that this is an outlier possibility, we need to be able to have practical ways to implement progressive, at least in my eyes, liberal, thoughtful, maybe is the best term here, thoughtful ways forward where we can be relatively sure people aren't brainwashed, but also be relatively sure that they feel like society is treating them fairly.
Yeah.
And that's challenging. That's very, very challenging. And the fact that politicians aren't having this conversation, they're just trying to have a pissing contest about who raised more money and who can build bigger walls.
And who's the stupidest buffoon on the stage, that's all they talk about.
It's disheartening because we're not attacking ideas, we're attacking people. Mm-hmm. And that has got to be one of the greatest failings of democracy. And I hope it fixes itself because I happen to be a pretty big fan of democracy, personally.
It's kind of tragic because whether or not you can... what's the word I'm looking for? Whether or not this particular source is trustworthy or not will depend on how much research and deep diving you do into their sources. I clearly haven't done that much, but when you look up the Democratic Index, right? Or I forgot what it's called, the Democracy Index. Mm-hmm. America, after these past few years, has been dropping in its overall democratic efficacy, I believe.
We dropped from the highest level to the next highest level.
Yeah, right. We're not a I forgot what it was called, the different terms that they used to categorize them. Yeah, maybe you can pull it up here.
So the United States at one point was considered a full democracy. And at least as it's listed today, we are considered a flawed democracy. If you want more specifics, definitely look this up yourself, because I won't go into trying to discuss all of the factors that go into this.
Yeah,
but you're right that at least given this one set of parameters, we have dropped in some sense.
Yep. And whether how much this means to you, like I said, I'm not exactly sure. I was looking at it briefly one day, and it seemed like the parameters were sensible, but I bring data up not because I think it's necessarily correct, but it definitely feels true to what I'm experiencing in America, especially in the context of political debate and discussion, and the lack thereof, honestly. So,
are you hopeful? Do you think, like I do, that we are going to figure this out? Or do you think, like many other people do, and you can make the argument, that we won't? That the human species, the human race, what have you, will just either eradicate itself in some way. Let's talk large scale here. Will eradicate itself because of our apparent differences, or maybe eradicate enough people that we have some small survivors and we evolve in some other way. Or are you hopeful that I am, whether forced or implicit, I don't know, that we do have a path forward and that we do have ways to get better, if not this ideal that you and I have seemingly deemed unfit or at least unrealistic.
I think it's I'm actually hopeful. Whether or not that surprises anyone, I mean, actually saying it myself is kind of surprising. For some reason, I have this confliction in my head, but I'm hopeful. I think I'm sure of that at this point, at least. That the more I learn about the world, the more I realize inherently we all have the same values. Humanity cares about the same things. You'll have outliers, as does everything that has ever existed. You know, you take basic astronomy classes, you learn about stars, you learn about the outliers, you know. The stars that have masses on the upper ends of limits of what could even constitute a star, they exist in everything. Whatever causes that in the human brain, I'm not sure, you know, to cause someone to think on the extreme or carry out extreme acts, but it's always going to exist. But looking at the average, looking at the way we think on a fundamental level for most humans is the same. We care about the same stuff. We want a lot of us want families or learn to want families at some point. A lot of us want to be successful. That's a loose term, but I think a lot of us define it in similar meanings, right? Basically, individual wish fulfillment. You know, oh, I want that yacht at some point. Well, wanting that is everyone can relate to that, except it might not be a yacht for everyone. You know, it might be a brand new gaming computer. It might be the job you always wanted. So I think humanity's on the same page. We're just god awful at describing that page to each other. We are so bad at trying to explain our case to each other. And it's not because we're necessarily bad at making it clear. We're also bad at listening. And so I think if we can figure that out, which I think comes as a result of discourse, then yeah, I think it'll start to unravel the true path. And so I am hopeful.
I like the way you describe that, this page. I might even expand it to a book, but same premise. I really would love if it is true that different races, different peoples, and I hope this is, and I think this is the case. We all have the same book, the same page, the same shared human experience. We could take that small scale to we have similar DNA or something more psychological. I don't know what that looks like. But the way you frame this is interesting because if we do have the same human experience inherently, which I really, really hope we do, because that would make our lives so much easier, then this dialogue isn't deciding a moral relativist collective ideal, because that is a slippery slope, as philosophers would point out all day long. But in reality, we aren't actually coming up with a solution. We are simply discovering what it is. We are just using a black light over this book of invisible ink. And dialogue is that black light. And again, back to my points earlier, I think understanding what we're looking for and empathy are the only ways to, let's say it like this, are the batteries that make this light function properly. But that really would be awesome. I love the way you put that. And I don't know the best way to quantify that to convince everyone we really do have the same values, rather than American values are so much better, we need to use them across the world. Because even if I agree with that, well, we know what can happen with imperial overreach. Let's look at the USSR. It didn't work out too hot for them. So we need to be careful, but if we can quantify that and convince the world we have the same values, at least on some deep level, whether we want to admit it or not, then dialogue will get us there. It really will.
And to touch back with the whole start of this episode, I can I can confidently tell you one thing that won't get us there, and that's identity politics.